Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
"You're gonna love this, Mike. He's a quick study," Leland had said with that paper-thin grin of his, the kind that tried to pass off manipulation as mentorship, like a used car salesman pretending he's your friend while he signs you into debt. That's how I met Zach, fresh out of whatever MBA program spit him out, wearing a blazer 2 sizes too tight, and eyes that sparkled a little too much for someone about to enter the soul-sucking world of mid-tier business consulting. At first, I didn't think much of it. Hell, I've trained plenty of new hires before, half the department, if I'm being honest, and I've always taken a kind of pride in it. There's something satisfying about passing on what you've learned the hard way. I thought that's what I was doing. I thought I was helping. Zach was polite, enthusiastic, just green enough to seem harmless. He took notes obsessively, shadowed every call I made, mirrored my email tone so precisely I once thought he had copied one verbatim. I figured it was flattery. I figured he wanted to learn how the job was really done, beyond the slide decks and buzzwords. What I didn't figure, what I should have, is that he wasn't learning the job. He was learning my job. Every client nuance, every workaround I'd built over 2 decades, every relationship I'd nurtured through dinners, disasters, and deadline-induced migraines. He was downloading all of it like some AI with gel in his hair. 3 months into this corporate babysitting gig, things started to feel off. Not outright hostile, not even cold, just different. Leland stopped checking in. HR stopped replying to my emails about PTO carryover. There were whispery hallway meetings that ended the second I turned the corner. Zach, meanwhile, grew bolder. He stopped asking how I handled things and started offering improvements. Once, during a pitch deck review, he actually interrupted me to suggest a leaner, more Gen Z-friendly layout. I laughed. He didn't. Still, I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was just tired, burned out. 22 years at Graybridge Solutions will do that to a man. I'd survived 4 reorgs, 2 acquisitions, and a recession. I'd seen good people axed with nothing but a cupcake and a "we'll miss you" card. But somehow, stupidly, I thought I was safe. Not untouchable. No one's untouchable. But respected, needed, valuable. So when the invite hit my calendar, Conference Room B, 10:00 a.m., Touchpoint Wata Leland, I didn't think twice. I brought my notebook. I even brought Zach, figuring maybe we'd be talking about transferring more accounts his way, easing my client load before Q4. I was wrong. Leland didn't stand when we walked in. He didn't smile either, just gestured to the chairs across the table like a man about to read a verdict. Zach sat. I sat. Leland clicked a pen, exhaled through his nose, and said it like he was ordering lunch. "Mike, we're making some structural changes. Your role's being eliminated." Just like that. No lead-in, no thank you, not even a phony compliment. My brain lagged a second behind, like it couldn't quite buffer what was happening. "Eliminated?" I repeated, because that's what you do when you're blindsided. You echo. Zach looked away, suddenly fascinated by a speck on the conference table. "We're moving in a different direction," Leland continued, folding his hands, like a priest, giving bad news with manufactured compassion. "Zach's going to be taking over your accounts. It's nothing personal." Nothing personal. Of course. Just 22 years traded for someone younger, cheaper. He didn't say that part, not yet, but he didn't have to. It hung in the air like the stink of a wet carpet. I didn't cry, didn't yell. I just sat there, feeling every muscle in my jaw tighten, every memory of working weekends, missing my daughter's dance recitals, covering for that idiot Leland when he flubbed a pitch to Boston Pharma, all of it rising like bile. I glanced at Zach. He met my eyes for the briefest second, and then dropped them again, ashamed or scared, or both. I don't know. Leland reached for a manila envelope. My exit package. No severance. 2 weeks healthcare extension. A line about outplacement support, like they were sending me off to a nice farm in the countryside. I took the envelope. I didn't say a word. I nodded once, stood up, and walked out. And that was the moment it hit me. I had just trained the guy who took my place. Every trick, every script, every hard-earned shortcut, I gave it to him, thinking I was helping build something, not realizing I was handing over my own blueprints. You ever been stabbed in the back so smoothly you didn't feel the blade until someone asked why you're bleeding? Because that's what it felt like. And the worst part, I said nothing. Not a word. Not then. But I didn't leave empty-handed. The silence that followed me out of that conference room wasn't quiet. It was deafening, like the kind of silence that stretches across a battlefield after a detonation, when the ringing in your ears becomes the only reminder that something just blew your life apart. I walked past the front desk with that damned manila envelope clutched in my hand like a final insult, past the break room where someone had just brewed a fresh pot of coffee that I no longer had the right to drink, past the sales floor where 3 of my own former mentees sat chatting about some lunch spot downtown, oblivious, detached, untouched by the axe that had just fallen on my neck. No one looked up. No one asked if I was okay. That's the thing about corporate. No matter how many birthdays you remember or weekends you sacrifice, the second your ID badge stops working, you're as ghostly as last quarter's metrics. I didn't go home right away. I drove around for nearly an hour, just circling blocks I didn't know, letting the buzz of traffic and the soft static of AM radio fill the space that my thoughts couldn't. I parked in front of a grocery store I'd never been to, stared at a cart return, and tried to remember when I started mistaking loyalty for security. I must have sat there 30 minutes before my wife called, twice. I didn't answer the first one. I was still trying to figure out how to say it out loud, how to explain to Carmen that after 22 years of never missing a deadline, after slogging through mergers, pivots, and layoffs that always seemed to skip over me, after all that, they fired me for being too expensive. She met me at the door with this half-worried, half-knowing look, like some part of her had sensed it coming before I did. I told her the truth, or at least as much of it as I could without choking on it. "They gave the job to Zach," I said, and I swear, the way her face tightened at the name, it was like she'd just swallowed glass. Carmen never liked him, said he had the eyes of someone who memorizes compliments. I didn't argue then. I just poured myself a bourbon and sat at the kitchen table where my daughter once did her homework, back when she still asked me to help with math problems and didn't yet realize how tired I always was. We didn't talk much that night. She asked if there was any severance, and I just slid the envelope across the table like it was a joke she hadn't heard yet. 2 weeks of health coverage, no payout, no apology, just a line about transition support, as if I was stepping gracefully into retirement instead of being shoved out the back door in the middle of a Wednesday. Carmen wanted me to be angry. She said it straight out, but I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was numb, like the sensation that comes before the pain, when your body hasn't figured out how badly it's been hurt. The next morning, I woke up at 6:30 out of sheer muscle memory. I showered, shaved, even put on my work shirt before remembering there was nowhere I needed to be. That's what they don't tell you about being canned. It's not just the job you lose. You lose the routine, the rhythm, the identity that came with the morning alarm and the commute and the 10 a.m. client check-in. You lose the version of yourself who was needed. I sat back on the edge of the bed in that stupid dress shirt, staring at my socks like they held the answers to anything. Carmen didn't say a word. She just placed a hand on my shoulder and left it there, like she was trying to hold me together by touch alone. I checked my email out of habit. My inbox was already deactivated, but my personal email had one new message. Zach. Subject line, "Thanks, Mike." No punctuation. The body of the email was one paragraph, cleanly typed, perfectly polite, and drenched in condescension. "I just wanted to thank you again for everything you taught me over the past few months. I know stepping into this role will be a challenge, but your guidance has really laid the groundwork for success. Wishing you all the best in your next chapter." No joke. I read it twice, just to make sure it was real. It was like getting stabbed and then complimented on how well you held still during it. And that's when the anger started. Not loud, not explosive, just this slow, smoldering burn in the chest, like someone lit a fire deep inside my ribs and walked away. I didn't hit reply. I didn't curse him out. I didn't forward the message to HR with a sarcastic comment. I just sat there and let it settle, let it soak into the muscle and marrow, this understanding that I had become disposable to people who had once toasted me at the company Christmas party for saving the pharma account. That same account, by the way, was now sitting in Zach's inbox. You spend 2 decades telling yourself that loyalty means something, that your experience has weight, that your name on a contract actually means you're part of the foundation. And then one day, someone younger and cheaper walks in with whiter teeth and buzzwords you don't use, and suddenly none of that history matters. It's not even personal, it's math. A spreadsheet somewhere spit out a number and your name was attached to the wrong side of the equal sign. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about every late night I stayed in the office to get ahead, every weekend I checked in just in case, every vacation I cut short because the client might need something, every dinner I rushed through to answer a Slack message no one remembered 5 minutes later. I thought about how many times I'd turned down better paying offers from smaller firms because I thought staying put meant honor, stability, a legacy. Turns out it just meant they knew where to find me when it was time to cut costs. And the irony, the funniest, most bitter irony, I still respected the work, still believed in what I did, still took pride in doing it better than most of the people who were now shaking Zach's hand and pretending he didn't just inherit something he hadn't earned. That was the part that stuck in my throat. Not the betrayal, not even the arrogance of it, but the fact that I had handed over everything I knew with open hands, like a fool who didn't see the cliff coming until he'd already stepped off. But it wasn't over, not even close. It was strange, really, how quickly you can go from being someone whose entire identity was fused to his job title to sitting in your garage on a Wednesday afternoon, surrounded by forgotten boxes, thumbing through the ghosts of your own past like they're relics of another man's life. I hadn't planned on coming out there. It wasn't some symbolic gesture or dramatic turning point. I was looking for a screwdriver, a goddamn screwdriver, something to fix the door hinge in the laundry room that had been squeaking for 2 years while I was too busy delivering value to corporate clients to notice the sound of my own home coming undone at the seams. But instead of finding tools, I found my history. There were 4 boxes, banker's boxes with reinforced lids labeled in my wife's careful handwriting. Mike, contracts. Mike, and old devices. Mike, client dinners. And the one that stopped me cold. Mike, personal archive. That last one was heavier than I remembered, and when I cracked the lid, the scent of paper and dust hit me like a punch. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was data. Years' worth of handwritten notes, call logs, saved emails, printed agendas from quarterly reviews, business cards I'd collected like baseball cards, each with a scribbled note about the client, what kind of coffee they liked, the names of their kids who had a dog, who hated being called on Fridays, who once broke down on a call because his wife had left him and still remembered, I stayed on the line. I should have shredded all of it years ago. That's what compliance would have told me to do. That's what policy said. But I never followed those rules to the letter, not because I was careless, but because I knew something no junior VP with a 6-month tenure could understand. Relationships aren't in the CRM. They live in memory, in moments, in the quiet trust that builds over years. And I had captured those fragments like a squirrel hoarding acorns, never knowing when winter might come. And winter had come. Sitting there, surrounded by evidence of the empire I had helped build but no longer belonged to, the idea didn't arrive like a thunderbolt or some vengeful whisper in my ear. It came slowly, quietly, with the calm of a man who has nothing left to lose. I didn't want to burn them. I didn't want to hack or leak or sabotage. That wasn't me. But I did want to remind them, Remind the people whose businesses I'd saved from cratering, whose operations I'd streamlined, whose trust I had earned not by promising results, but by delivering them. So I opened my laptop, an old ThinkPad with a cracked screen and a battery that only worked when plugged in, and I began digging. Over the years, I'd backed up my client correspondence on a separate drive. Not maliciously, not even intentionally. It started as a habit, keeping receipts, just in case someone tried to twist a quote or pretend a promise was never made. That habit, once called paranoia, now looked a lot like wisdom. There it was, every email, every deck, every deliverable, hundreds of folders, each labeled with the client's name, each containing years of dialogue, recommendations, even jokes exchanged late at night during brutal sprints to hit impossible deadlines. I remembered them, but more importantly, they remembered me. I didn't start with a blast email. That would have been amateur. No, I crafted each message like a personal letter, short but specific, warm but deliberate. I wasn't asking for anything. I was simply reaching out to reconnect, letting them know I was no longer at Graybridge, and if they ever needed guidance, consultation, or just a sounding board for upcoming strategies, I was exploring new opportunities independently. I didn't mention Zach. I didn't mention the firing. I didn't even mention the betrayal. I let my silence speak volumes. The first reply came within 2 hours. It was from Diane, VP of Operations at Salvamed Pharmaceuticals. I hadn't heard from her in 6 months, but her message was immediate, almost urgent. Wait, what? You're not with Graybridge anymore? That's insane. We were just finalizing the Q3 campaign. Where are you now? We should talk. Then came Benji from Monarch Freight. Damn, Mike. They let you go? Morons. Let's grab coffee. We've got new contracts incoming, and I'd love to have you on them. Then Corwin. Then Anita. Then others I'd forgotten even remembered me. It wasn't just loyalty. It was recognition. These were people who had sat across from me in boardrooms, where Leland never once showed his face, who had trusted me to clean up messes their internal teams couldn't, who saw me not as a vendor but as a partner. They weren't following me because I had the logo. They were following me because I had the trust. By the end of the week, I had 12 active leads. 3 of them wanted immediate project proposals. 2 offered short-term retainers while they figured out the budget. 1, get this, even asked if I wanted to join their company full-time. Carmen watched me from the kitchen as I paced the living room with a phone to my ear and a legal pad in my hand, jotting down figures I hadn't seen since my peak at Graybridge. When I finally sat down that night, she poured us both a drink, whiskey for me, wine for her, and said, "They thought they fired you. Turns out they just set you free." I didn't respond. I just clinked my glass against hers and smiled for the first time in days, because deep down I knew something Leland and Zach hadn't even begun to grasp. I wasn't just part of the company. The company had been built on me, and now I was building something else. There's a moment after the storm begins, but before it fully takes shape, when everything feels eerily calm, when the air thickens and the birds go silent, and you know something is coming, even if you can't quite name it yet. And that's exactly what it felt like watching the cracks begin to form at Graybridge from the outside, quietly, methodically, without a single finger lifted in vengeance, but with the unrelenting force of inevitability. I wasn't trying to destroy anything. Not really. I wasn't fueled by malice or spite, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't savor every update, every whisper of confusion that filtered back to me through contacts and clients and the slow churn of corporate rumor. I didn't want fire. I wanted erosion. I wanted them to bleed drop by drop, deal by deal, until they realized that what they thought was expendable had, in fact, been the glue holding everything together. And it started subtly. Diane from Salvamed, after our call, decided not to renew her contract through Graybridge and instead signed a 1-year deal directly with me. And it wasn't loud, and she didn't make a fuss. She just sent over an agreement and cut the cord. No internal memo, no fireworks. Just one less big-name logo on Graybridge's Q4 projections. Then came Monarch Freight, then Hydronics Logistics, then an old contact from Clearwater Ventures I hadn't worked with in almost 4 years, who remembered a whiteboard session I ran that saved them millions in penalties during a regulatory crisis. These weren't flukes. They were reminders. But the real shift, the moment I knew I'd hit bone, was when I got a call from Jason Wu, the regional director for Harwood Financial. He wasn't warm, not at first. He was cautious, measured, the way executives get when they know something's off, but can't yet prove it. He asked how I was doing, how things were going post-Graybridge, and then, after a long pause, said, "Mike, did you take any of our documentation with you?" I almost laughed. "No," I told him, "but I remember everything I built for you, and I still believe in the process we put in place. I'd be happy to walk you through it again. Clean slate." That was all it took. A week later, he terminated his retainer with Graybridge and moved the entire consulting portfolio over to me. He didn't even ask for a discount. Meanwhile, I kept things lean. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't build a website or rent office space downtown to look established. I worked from my den, from the same desk where I'd helped my daughter with algebra, back when life still felt linear and fair. Carmen helped organize paperwork and keep track of invoices. We ordered business cards off a discount site, printed on thick recycled stock that felt almost unnecessarily luxurious, but it gave me a weird sense of dignity, like handing someone a card that didn't feel flimsy was a small rebellion against everything that had tried to cheapen me. Clients didn't care about branding or polished decks anymore. They cared that when they called, I answered, that when they had a problem, I remembered the history, that I didn't make them explain everything from scratch to some eager 20-something still figuring out what acronyms meant. They cared that I showed up, not with buzzwords but with solutions. Back at Graybridge, the rot was spreading. I didn't need to spy or dig for intel. The calls started coming to me. Quiet ones, panicked ones. A junior project manager reached out anonymously through LinkedIn to ask if I was hiring. An old colleague texted late at night to say the sales pipeline had collapsed in on itself because half the relationships had gone dark or gone rogue, depending on who you asked. I didn't respond to most of them, not out of pride, but because I knew better than to give people an easy out while they were still inside the walls I'd already escaped. And then came the first truly satisfying moment, a leaked memo. It showed up in my inbox as a PDF, forwarded from a burner address with no note. The header was unmistakable, Graybridge Executive Operations, followed by 2 words in bold, client attrition. The content was brutal. 32% drop in renewals. Massive dip in client satisfaction scores. Speculation about former senior consultant influence. I didn't even need to read between the lines. I was the ghost haunting their machine. But I never gloated. Not publicly. Not even in private, really. I wasn't dancing in the ruins. I was simply acknowledging that their collapse was the result of their own arrogance, their own blind belief that loyalty could be replaced with cost efficiency, that history could be downloaded from a server, and personality could be replicated by someone with fresher breath and better eyesight. They had made the fatal mistake of thinking my value was in my salary instead of in the trust I had built, the years I had invested, the clients I had nurtured like fragile ecosystems that required care, memory, and above all, respect. Even Zach, for all his swagger, was faltering. Word had it he had botched a negotiation with a longtime client, losing a $400K contract in a single call because he didn't know the client's aversion to being pitched on Tuesdays. It wasn't just a detail, it was a test, one the client didn't know they were giving but expected him to pass anyway. And when he didn't, they called me. So, yes, every single one. They came. Some slowly, some immediately. Some with cautious steps like deer approaching a new clearing. But they came. Not because I begged, not because I burned bridges, but because they remembered what it felt like to work with someone who actually gave a damn. And maybe that's what made the revenge feel so clean. Because it wasn't revenge. Not in the classic sense. I didn't sabotage, I didn't slander, I didn't threaten lawsuits or out anyone in HR or leak nasty reviews on Glassdoor. I just kept showing up, quietly, consistently, and with more resolve than I'd had in years. And they followed. Every single one. It's a strange kind of quiet, the one that settles in after the storm. Not the silence of emptiness or defeat, but something far deeper, calmer, wiser, almost sacred in its stillness. The silence of a man who has endured a clean cut to the ego, survived the hemorrhage of identity, and somehow, against the odds and without raising his voice or throwing a single punch, stitched himself back together in a shape far sturdier than the one they tried to discard. That was the quiet that filled my small home office as I sat one autumn morning, a year after they fired me, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm from distraction, scrolling through a calendar that was, for the first time in decades, full only of things I had chosen. There was no fancy logo in the corner of my invoices now. There was no assistant sending follow-ups on my behalf, no corporate card, no Mike Rowan, senior strategic consultant, stamped in foil across a plexiglass nameplate. But what I did have, what no layoff, no board decision, no smirking VP with a spreadsheet could ever take, was the quiet dignity of knowing that everything I had rebuilt was real and earned and mine. Clients kept coming. Some trickled in after months of silence, sheepishly admitting they'd tried to see how things would go with Graybridge and realized, as many eventually did, that the house they stayed in after you leave never quite feels like home. Others showed up with urgency, desperate to clean up the wreckage that had followed my departure, dragging timelines and budgets behind them like broken furniture from a flooded basement. But all of them came not because I was the cheapest or the flashiest or the most connected. They came because when the floor fell out beneath them, they wanted someone who knew how to build a foundation without asking them to explain, once again, what they actually needed. I never hired a team. I thought about it, even took a few calls from eager young consultants who wanted to be part of something new. But in the end, I realized that what I had built wasn't a company. It was a refuge, a quiet, lean, stubborn little island of competence in a world increasingly obsessed with optics over outcomes, with talk over delivery, with youth over wisdom. I wasn't interested in scale. I was interested in peace. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of justice. Leland never reached out. Not that I expected him to. He'd always been the kind of man who could set a building on fire and then complain about the smoke while stepping over the people still trying to crawl out. But I did see his name pop up on LinkedIn one afternoon in the form of a vague update, moving on to new opportunities. That's corporate for got pushed out quietly, but still pretending I chose it. No fanfare, no farewell post with fake tears, just a whimper of a send-off for a man who once thought himself the architect of an empire. I didn't smile when I saw it, but I didn't look away either. Zach, for his part, disappeared even more quietly. One of my old contacts mentioned in passing that he had left Graybridge 6 months after the collapse began, citing a mismatch of vision and personal growth priorities, phrases that mean absolutely nothing but cost the speaker nothing to say. I didn't feel hatred toward him anymore, just a kind of vague pity, the way you feel when you realize someone never understood the weight of what they were handed until it slipped through their fingers and shattered on the floor. He'd been a pawn, not a villain, and while I'll never forget the look he gave me in that conference room, eyes full of guilt he didn't know what to do with, I no longer carried it like a wound. It had scabbed over and become part of the skin I now wore, like armor. And what did I become, you ask? What does a man do after decades of loyalty are erased with a single sentence? After his replacement fails, after the company that discarded him learns too late what it lost? I became free. Not in the poetic, dreamy sense, but in the grounded, hard-earned way that only comes when you realize your value doesn't live in someone else's office or budget forecast. It lives in the weight of your experience, in the relationships you nurture, in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can survive being broken without becoming bitter. One morning, as the leaves outside began their slow descent toward winter, I opened an email that gave me pause. It was from a company I had always admired, one of those rare firms that actually seemed to value integrity over spin, with a reputation for treating people like humans instead of resources. The subject line was simple: coffee, and the message, even simpler: heard you're back in the game. We'd love to talk. No pressure. I didn't reply right away. I read it twice, then a third time, and I sat there, letting the weight of it settle. Not because it was a big deal in itself, but because it represented something larger that I wasn't chasing anymore, that now they were coming to me. Carmen passed behind me, caught the flicker of a smile on my face, and said, "Another offer?" I nodded. "You going to take it?" she asked. I leaned back in my chair, looked at the calendar, meetings I had chosen, projects I believed in, and a long weekend I had blocked off just because I could, and said, maybe, or maybe I'll just enjoy this a little longer. And that was the final truth. I didn't need to win loudly. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to light a fire or throw a punch or drag anyone through the mud. I just had to survive. I just had to keep walking, step by quiet step, until the people who thought they erased me realized I never even had to raise my voice.